We are the Navy Blues. We are the old dark Navy Blues. We're the team that never lets you down. We're the only team old Carlton knows. With all the champions they like to send up.
Yeah, g'day fellas. My name's Jim Chandler. I'm a born and bred Brisbane boy. Grew up in Kedron. Couple of brothers, one older, one younger. My dad was a Korean War veteran. His dad was a World War I veteran and World War II, actually. Yeah, life wasn't sort of anything out of the ordinary growing up sort of thing. You know, I went to the local school and played football with my mates from the school. Had a strong interest in Australian football, you know, from a very young age. Yeah, so life's kind of revolved around, you know, sport and school and that sort of thing. And eventually came time to leave school. I remember finished school on a Tuesday in those days anyway. Sorry, not Tuesday, Thursday. And my dad used to go to work early in the morning, and I got up early on a Friday morning, and he said to me, he said, "Oh, you finished school, mate?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "You know, what are you going to do?" And I said, "Oh, well, I have a bit of a break and probably look for a job in the new year." And he said, "Good, you start Monday." So he was the foreman in a tyre retreading factory. So I went to work there with him for a few years, and you know, I think talking to him and that, like when we used to travel to and from work and that, and he used to talk to me a lot about the army. And I was, you know, sort of lacking a little bit of direction as a teenager, wondering what I was going to do with my life, and I thought there's got to be things better than this. So anyway, so I decided to join the army. And a mate that I grew up with lived across the street. We both joined up together. I got held over for 2 weeks. He went off before me. I went 2 weeks later, and I can still remember, you know, running into him up in the mess that first night when I arrived at recruit training. And he tapped me on the shoulder, and I turned around and I see this fella, and he's as bald as what I am now. And he said to me, he said, "Oh my God, what have we done?" And we'd both signed on for 6 years. So we thought, oh gee, this might not have been a really good decision, you know. But anyway, well, we both, you know, finished recruit training and then went off to infantry training. Funnily enough, you know, they used to ask you a few weeks before you finish recruit training, you know, what part of the army that you wanted to go into. And they'd asked me, they said, "Oh, where do you want to go?" And I said, "Oh, I want to go to infantry." And they said, "Well, you don't have to worry about that, you're going." So we both went off to infantry and did our training at Singleton in New South Wales, and we got posted up to Townsville. At the time there, the Russians had invaded Afghanistan, I think, in late 1979, and the government had decided they wanted to raise a force that was capable of being, you know, quickly deployed overseas. So they created what they call the Operational Deployment Force, and was based on 3 Brigade there in Townsville. So anyway, we didn't really have much choice as to which battalion we wanted to go to. We were all being, if we were 19 and single, we were all going to 24 RER, so that's where we went. Yeah, so I spent 6 years in 24 RER and got out for 12 months. Then I got back in again. I always knew I'd go back because I loved it. And then I went down to Singleton for a couple of years, and then I call transferred over to Army Aviation as a helicopter crewman. And I spent the rest of my Army career as a load master on Iroquois Black Hawk helicopters. But yeah, so that was kind of my career, I suppose. Did a couple of trips overseas. Was lucky enough to go to Malaysia for a few months. New Guinea, went to East Timor in 1999, went and, you know, to go over and help them people out, which was a good thing I think our country did. And yeah, then I I moved on from the army, and then I worked as a contractor for them, training guys to do pretty much the same job that I did for the previous sort of 15 years. But you know, a bit of a family history, I suppose, there with the army. You know, my grandfather was part of the 42nd Battalion, and he served in France. Luckily or unluckily, I suppose, he was wounded in action and declared unfit and sent home. So I suppose he was one of the lucky ones. I think he re-enlisted again in World War II. He wasn't fit to be a combat soldier again. He was I think he was 48 years old or something when he re-enlisted in World War II. But he was a mechanic, so they put him in as a bloody armourer. So he served in World War II again, and my dad went to Korea, and I think 1952 or something like this. Served with 3 RAR, and he was wounded in action. I think it was 17 days before the ceasefire in 1953. So he was pretty lucky. So I suppose I'm probably lucky to be sitting here as well. But yeah. So and then, you know, his brothers served in the military and that as well. So it kind of just sort of flowed down into us. Funnily enough, my brother was in the Army Cadets at high school. I never was. I wasn't interested in it. But yeah, my interest sort of grew after I left school and was working with my dad. Yeah. Yeah, it was a really terrible time. I'd served in N5 Aviation Regiment with Dave at the same time. I wasn't on the cruise that night, but yeah, it was a terrible time in the unit. He's a fantastic fella, Dave Burke. He was a absolutely first-rate pilot, but an even better man, you know, a really, really wonderful guy. I don't know if he told you in the interviews or not, but due to his association with Queensland Rugby, in 1999 when we were in East Timor, Australia had won the World Cup in rugby, and I don't know how he did it, but anyway, there was 3 fellas came over, was Daniel Herbert, Mark Connors and Dan Crowley, I think, and they brought the cup over, and we flew it around East Timor and, you know, visited all the different, the Aussie units and the Kiwis and that, and it was just fantastic. I can remember being in a place in Timor. I got some photographs myself, but there must have been hundreds of soldiers that had their hands on the World Cup and having bloody selfies done with it and all that sort of thing. And yet there's so many men that have played, you know, rugby for their country who haven't had their hands on that trophy. Yeah. So it was just such a fantastic experience. Yeah. Butterworth it's always been a bit of a funny thing, I think, because they were 3-month deployments. We put a rifle company over there, and it was essentially security for the Air Force base over there. You know, there'd been some trouble, you know, insurrection in Malaysia in the 1960s, and you know, it was thought to have sort of finished in the late 60s, but I think it continued on for quite a few years afterwards. And the Malays themselves have a second sort of period that they refer to with that insurrection, and they consider it to have ended in 1989. So there seemed to be some sort of threat as far as the airbase was concerned over there. You know, we carried live ammunition, we had rules of engagement governing what we were doing and that type of thing. But it was a great time there to be kind of trained up, deployed. In essence, we felt as if we were going somewhere on operations, even though it wasn't like that. It was still a good trip, and it was a great experience to be with a lot of those guys over there. You know, I loved it. It was fantastic. There's been a lot of talk, you know, over the years since, where you know different organisations have wanted to see that service upgraded, you know, to a kind of like an active service sort of situation, and I think there's probably some justification for that as well. I think one of the funniest things I saw over there though was, you know, we were somewhere up near the border with Thailand somewhere in the bush, and I can't believe that this guy, you know, they used to call him the chow waller, you know, that rode around on a bike, and he had some thing on the back of his bike where he could cook food or do something like that. And now this guy found us out in the bloody bush somewhere and turned up when he had bloody drinks and he was trying to sell us and all sorts of things. Yeah. It reminds me of we had to go down to a place called Palada down the southern end of the Malay Peninsula in Johor, and we'd do some training down there anyway. There was a guy down there, he was an Indian fella, and of course he ends up with the name Gunga, from Gunga Din sort of thing from the story, but apparently he had worked for the British Army prior to World War II, and then when the Japanese came in, he worked for them as a boot boy doing boots and that sort of thing, polishing boots, and then when the British came back at the end of World War II, he worked for them again, and anyway, so he was doing our boots for us where we were down at Palada, and it was a place where, you know, a lot of restrictions were taken away from us, and we were allowed to drink a beer in the barracks and that type of thing, and we used to fellas would, you know, half finish a bottle of beer and they just put it on the floor beside their bed, you know, and this old Gunga used to come around in the middle of the night and he'd pick the boots up and he'd take them out on the parade ground and he'd polish all the boots up, but he also used to polish off the half-empty bottles of beer and that were under the bed. Anyway, we'd been told, you know, it was okay to give him a couple of beers, but don't give him anything hard. So anyway, somebody bought a bottle of Captain Morgan rum one night and left that out, and he must have got into that, because we wake up the next morning and no one's got any boots. But outside on the parade ground, there's Gunga laying out there. He's blind drunk and there's just boots laying everywhere. So yeah, it was funny, yeah. Yeah, 21 years I ended up doing. I think I just got to the stage where I thought it was time to kind of move on. You know, nowadays I notice that there's so many people who serve for many years longer, and I think, you know, if I had my time again, maybe I would have stayed in. But you know, job opportunities had come up, so I thought it was time to move on. I worked as a contractor doing the same job for 12 years or so after I discharged. People used to ask me, you know, how did I go, like when I discharged from the army, you know, did I have any trouble with that transition back into civil life? But I didn't really know, because I was still working for the army and was still kind of embedded into, you know, army sections type of thing. So even though I was wearing a civilian uniform or clothes, I hadn't really left the army. So it wasn't until I sort of finished that work that I then realised what it was like to be sort of disconnected from the military again. I had some health issues and that type of thing, which affected my ability to continue to work in a air crewman capacity, and kind of that was the end of my working life. Then, you know, I sort of stopped working and haven't worked for quite a few years now. But you know, things are pretty good. I'm happy where I am, and I would have liked to have continued to work in the aviation industry, but yeah, I wasn't able to do that. The Army Aviation Corps, its main, or its home, if you like, is at the Oki base. So I worked there, and that's where a lot of guys used to come through the training pipeline. They do their initial training onto helicopters, and then convert onto a certain type of aircraft before they got posted up to Townsville's usually where the guys would go. But then Sydney came online, you know, in recent years. That was another option for them as well. Yeah, I've got 4 children. I've got 2 older daughters from my first marriage, at you know, 30, 33, 32 years of age, and I've got 2 younger kids, twins, who've just recently turned 14, a boy and a girl. So yeah, I don't see them a lot now, since I'd separated from their mum. But you know, we still have a good relationship and all that sort of thing. I just don't get to see them as much as I'd like to. I am a member here of Cleveland RSL. I'm sort of travelling a bit now with my partner. You know, we decided we'd sort of, you know, do the caravan thing and start travelling around and see the country and enjoy life whilst we're in the twilight of our lives, I suppose. I like to try and keep fit. I like riding my bike and walking. I don't run anymore, but I still try to keep fit. I was a pretty keen boxer, you know, in recent years at least anyway, and did hope to fight masters at one stage, but some injuries like neck injuries and my hands and that aren't sort of conducive to that anymore, so I've blown that one off. Yeah, so I just sort of ride the bike now as the main sort of fitness thing. But yeah, we enjoy travelling, love going to different places. I've always been somebody that just loves going somewhere. So I suppose that's probably why the army suited me a lot, because we were always going somewhere different. Yeah. It's an interesting one about, you know, with the Carlton Football Club. I'd sort of had just begun to develop an interest in football, and my older brother had started to play football. And I can go back to the year, it was 1968, so I'm 7 years old and I'm about to sort of embark on the football career. But anyway, growing up in Brisbane in those days, the only football, when I say football, the only Aussie rules football that you'd see on television in Brisbane was, you know, the VFL match of the day that used to come through late on a Saturday night on the ABC. Anyway, my dad and I was sitting up with my dad, and we were watching the VFL Grand Final 1968, and of course Carlton's playing Essendon. Anyway, we hear the name, surname of Chandler, one of the players that was playing for Carlton, so there you go. That's where the Carlton allegiance comes from all those years ago. No relation, but I used to tell everyone he was, but you know, you're entitled to lie a bit when you're a kid, aren't you, you know? But yeah, I played Aussie rules footy all my life in Brisbane, and you know, I continued to play when I joined the army and played up in North Queensland. Was lucky enough to play in the bicentennial Services Australian football team, which was the combined Army, Navy, Air Force team. I don't like to tell too many people, but that was probably a few blokes that didn't get to come along that year that, you know, helped me get into the team. But yeah, anyway, that's another story, isn't it? But yeah, so I've always loved the football. I watch it. Yeah, I watch it regularly. I have to say that I'm still getting over yesterday's disappointment from Good Friday against North Melbourne. Still think we were robbed, but yeah, anyway. I'm just hoping things will turn around again, seeing it's been 30 years since we've won a premiership. And Jesus, I'd like to think I'm still around when they win the next one. Yeah. I'll tell you here's a funny story, I suppose, but it was the first time I ever went to Princes Park and Carlton played Richmond. And it was I think it was in the late 80s sometime when they played. Luckily we won that game. It was the first time I'd attended a match at Princes Park. But in those days, like, you could buy plenty of beers, you know, from the can bar sort of thing while you're watching the game. There was no limit on any of them or anything like that. So we put a few beers away. So, you know, had to go to the toilet regularly, and the one that was near us, I've never seen a urinal as long as that in my life. Like, it looked like it was a mile long, you know. Just went in there, and the number of people it was in there, it was unbelievable. Yeah, but I've been to Melbourne quite a few times to watch the Blues play. Seen some great matches. I think one of my greatest memories of watching Carlton play, and we actually lost, was Brendan Favola kicking for goal with about a minute to go on the clock, and if he'd have kicked it, we'd have won. It was against Hawthorn, and I'm standing, felt like where I was in the stand, he was coming straight at me, kicking the footy straight at me. And it looked like it was coming, it was going to go in, and it just drifted off. Yeah, and I missed. That's probably my greatest memory of attending a Carlton game in Melbourne. I've obviously seen them play here in Brisbane a few times. You know, I think we've been on the receiving end quite a few times at the Gabba from the Lions, but gee, we've also won a couple there as well. Yeah, but I really love the football. Yeah, it's always been a big part of my life. People have often asked me why I barracked for Carlton when I grew up in Brisbane, and that, you know, why don't you barrack for the Lions? You know, they're the Brisbane team sort of thing. But you know, I've always been somebody that, you know, like loyalty's a big thing as far as I'm concerned. And because I'd sort of latched onto them when I was a kid, that's it. I'm loyal. You know, like my old club in Brisbane, Wayne Johnston coached there. I think in the early 90s. I wasn't here. I wasn't living around here at that time. But anyway, I was home at one stage, and back in the mid 80s, I'd play football with a fella up in North Queensland who'd played under 19s at Carlton in I think about 1983, 84 or something like that. And I bumped into somebody at this football club in Brisbane who was an ex-Carlton player, and I'd said to him, I said, did you ever run into this bloke? You know, he was playing in the under-19s there when you were actually there. And he said to me, he said, gee, he said, where did you meet him? In prison, was it? And that's the sort of, this guy was just such a magnet for trouble, but he was such a brilliant footballer. Yeah, anyway, but it was a good story. I think, you know, someone who valued mateship and really values the history of our forefathers in this country. I think you look back at, you know, we're a very young nation by comparison to the rest of the world, but you know, in our short history, you know, Australians have acquitted themselves very well around the world, particularly in times of war. And we've only played a small role in things, but I think quite a significant role. I think we have a very, very proud history that I fear we're losing sight of that. And it does kind of, makes me feel better that when I see the number of young people involved in Anzac Day, you kind of think that, I think things aren't as bad as what they might appear. Anyway, as far as my kids are concerned, I like that they would remember me as being somebody who was loyal, valued mateship, and, you know, very much loved our country. Yeah, that's probably about it.